I'm Professor Joan Debardeleben from the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University in Ottawa. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the research I'm engaged with right now. This research is attempting to try to understand some of the causes of the growing conflict between Russia and the EU that have emerged in the context of the crisis over Ukraine that began late in 2013 and went into has actually continued until now, and which has resulted in both the European Union and Canada and the US putting sanctions on Russia, and Russia responding with counter-sanctions of its own. There's certainly a lot of concern in policy circles that this kind of tension between Russia and the West is very dysfunctional and introduces some significant risks in terms of the kind of stability and peace that have governed the European continent since the end of World War II. Of course, the European Union, when it was formed, one of its primary objectives was to create a peaceful and integrated European space. And after the collapse of communism, the European Union was open to the possibility of countries that had formerly been in the communist bloc joining the European Union, to include countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Baltic states, and then 3 years later, Romania and Bulgaria. Those are just some of the countries that joined. There are others as well. But it was, one might have seen that as quite a success of the EU to spread the values of democracy and market economics to that post-communist space. But it seems that some years later, the objective has faltered a bit as tension has risen with Russia. And this was certainly not an objective that the European Union was pushing, and was something that it was actually trying to avoid with its policies. So my research is really trying to understand why that happened, and why we've developed now a kind of situation of competition between Russia and the European Union in terms of influence in other countries that were part of the former Soviet Union, particularly Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, which are the ones that are really the most prominently mentioned here and where the conflict has been most evident. Some of the findings that I've developed so far try to look at the issue from the perspective of Russia, to try to understand what's triggered the kind of reaction that we've seen, and took its most extreme form in the annexation of Crimea, which was formerly part of Ukraine, and which is what elicited really the sanctions and counter-sanctions that we're seeing now. And my basic conclusion is that Russia was responding to a perception that certain of its fundamental objectives had not been met in the post-communist period. That Russia was seeking really a kind of equal status, a new status, after having lost the superpower status that the Soviet Union had, and it felt frustrated in that attempt, and frustrated by the declining influence in some of the neighboring countries like Ukraine. So out of that came a certain reactions on the part of the Russian state, the Russian leadership, to try to rectify that situation. This is the kind of work that I've been doing. As you will understand, it's very current, and it's in a very controversial area. But I'm hoping that the result will be to try to develop the groundwork for policymakers in the West, as well as in Russia, to better understand some of the bases of these conflicts, and therefore to move toward some kind of reduction in the level of conflict that we're seeing right now.